Hello everyone, Michael Jones here from Michael Jones Custom Knives. Welcome back to my forge. In today's video, I'll take you through my latest project, which is this vise, which I just completed. I built this vise because I had a smaller 3.5-inch cast iron vise that broke on me while I was working on a project. So instead of going out and buy a really expensive one online or out of one of the local box stores, I decided to take on the project of building this myself. I went online and researched some other designs, and I came up with my own custom design. So in today's video, I'll take you through the steps of building this vise, talk about the materials that I used, and hopefully you'll enjoy this process and learn something along the way. If you enjoy this video, please come back to my channel and check out future videos. And as always, please subscribe.
I start out by using some leftover 2x2 1/4-inch tubing that I had left over from my hydraulic press build. You can see that build in another video on my channel. Here I'm cutting off a piece and going to be welding two pieces together to make the appropriate length that I need. This 2x2 piece will be the center tube that goes inside the 2.5-inch quarter wall tube that I had. So this will make the sliding piece for the vise. Here I'm starting to cut out the pieces that'll make the jaws for the vise. I didn't have any pieces wide enough for the jaws, so I had to use some 3-inch wide 1/2-inch stock that I had on hand. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting those pieces to length, and then I will mill out the slot or the recess for the jaw. This is a piece by 1x2 mild steel that I'm milling out for the jaw plates. I'm making the jaws 6 inches long, and these will be welded into the jaw plates. I had a piece of 1084 4-inch wide, quarter-inch thick steel left over from a previous knife build, so I decided to use that to cut out and make the jaw plates. Here I'm cutting off a piece of the 2.5-inch quarter wall square tubing. This will be used to make the front sliding jaw. By using a piece of the cut-off tubing and welding it to the slide, this allows me to keep the width of the jaw plates for the front and the back set of jaws the same. I'm welding on the side plates for the front sliding jaw. I took a square and lined them up with the front edge of the tubing. Here I'm tacking them in place and then welding them up solid. Here I'm cutting out the end caps for the tubes, one on each end. One will hold the screw and another will hold the piece of pipe with the threads for the screw. I had to use 2 plates of steel to get the thickness I needed for the front bearings. In the previous scene, you saw me drilling a hole in one of the plates to accept the bearing to allow clearance, and now I'm joining the two pieces together. So one will be for the bearing for a pass-through, and the other is for the bearing, the thrust bearing to push against for opening and closing. This piece of pipe will act as a shroud or a cover for the front thrust bearing. This piece of pipe will hold the spindle nut for the main screw. I'm using my mill to mill off the edges or the corners of a 3/4 inch coupling. The goal here is to create a shoulder so that when I slide this inside of the pipe, it butts up against the square end. Then I can weld against that. I'm drilling holes through the pipe so that I can weld through the holes into the coupling. That way to secure it against the pipe so that it won't ever pull out or push through. Now I'm working on the screw. I've threaded 3 nuts onto the end of the awl thread that's 3/4 inch, and I'm drilling through the nuts into the awl thread. I'll weld in through the hole to securely fasten the nuts to the awl thread, similar to what I did with the 3/4 inch coupling and the piece of pipe. I purchased an 1 1/8" deep socket to make the part to hold the handle. This will also allow me to use a 1/2" impact wrench or a ratchet to be able to open and close the vise. Here I'm milling the hole through the 3/4 inch nuts for the handle. This nut will be used to hold the spring behind the thrust bearing on the inside side of the vise. Here I'm drilling a couple of holes to put set screws to hold it in place. Here's a test fit up of the spindle nut, the thrust bearings, the screw, and the housing that I made. I painted it black with primer, and I'm getting ready to test everything out. I'm cutting the spindle nut to the correct length and getting ready to weld it on to the end plate. I've marked the center of the end plate, and I'm using a hole saw without the drill bit to mark the outline of where the pipe for the spindle nut needs to go so it's properly centered. Here I'm cutting the screw to the correct length to match the length of the spindle nut. Now that I have the spindle nut and the screw working properly, now it's time to attach the jaws and the jaw plates. These pieces I'm welding in behind the jaws are braces or supports so that the jaws don't bend or buckle under extreme pressure. Now that the main body of the vise is complete, it's time to start working on the swivel base. Here I'm making the base out of two pieces of drawn over mandrels tubing, which is a type of seamless pipe. I've got an 8-inch diameter half-inch wall piece for the bottom piece, and the insert is a 7-inch diameter with quarter-inch wall insert, which I'm driving in. This will create the lip and the base for the top and bottom plate of the swivel to ride and rest against. This small piece of pipe will be used to make the locking nuts for the swivel part of the base. I'm using the same handle material 5/8 inch rod to make the plugs or end caps for the locking nuts. I'll drill through them and then weld them so it's one solid piece. Here I'm working on the top and bottom plates of the swivel. I'm drilling out the holes for the bolts that will attach with the locking nuts. Now that the base is finished, here I'm attaching the stationary portion of the jaws to the base. The underside of the jaws and the top plate are already painted red. I did that so that there wouldn't be a seam or gap between those that didn't have paint, so it wouldn't rust over time. All the fabrication on the vise is now complete. I've got everything primed, and now I'm starting to put the final coat of red paint. The very last step before final assembly is cutting the grooves into the jaw plates so that they can grip objects in the vise. Here's all the completed parts that make up the vise laid out on this table. Most of the materials you see here I had on hand, but I did have to buy a few pieces, such as the thrust bearings, the spring, the nuts and the bolts, the 3/4 inch all thread and the coupling, and also the drawn over mandrel steel rings to make the base out of. But everything else I pretty much had on hand. So overall, this was a pretty cool project to work on, and the next phase is to assemble all the parts. I forgot to add grease to the top ring underneath the top plate. I'll come back here in a minute after I realize it and add some. I didn't really show it earlier in the video, but here's how the thrust bearings in the screw are assembled. I have an outside thrust bearing going inside of the collar on the plate, and then another on the inside. This will allow smooth action when you're opening or closing the vise. Here's the final assembly, and here I'm using a ratchet to open and close the vise to test it out. If you'll notice, you can use the handle, you can use a wrench or a ratchet or an impact to open and close it. Fully extended, the jaws measure 11.5 inches. Here's the finished product. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please come back and check out my channel for future videos, and as always, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.